Okay, great. I'm glad everybody is here to join us this evening. It's a big hello from Democrats Abroad, South Africa. I would like to welcome all of you joining from across the African continent and further afield, and thank you all for taking part in this discussion today. We're pleased to launch a series of online events entitled Democrats Abroad, Africa Meets. Our first guest to join us in this is the Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director for Africa at the National Security Council, Ms. Dana Banks. Hi, Ms. Banks. Ms. Banks will discuss the U.S.-Africa relationship and how the United States government is working to increase trade and investment on the continent, amongst other things. A key element of this is the Prosper Africa initiative, which I'm sure she will expound on during the course of this evening. We're also pleased to have with us our Democrats Abroad Global Chair, Candice Kerestan, as well as the DA, I should say, the newest member of the African community of DA, the DA Kenya Chair, Robyn Emerson. Hi, Robyn.
Hey, Brad.
Let me quickly turn things over to Robyn so she can share with you some of the current efforts and initiatives surrounding the establishment of DA Africa.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brad. And good day, Ms. Banks, and good day, Candice. Thank you very much. And everyone, thank you for being here. Greetings on this day, which is the first official day of celebration. Brad, did you know that? Of the International Day of People of African Descent. What a kind of a great, the universe just kind of conspired for us to be having this first event on this day, the official day of that. And through the observance of this day, you know, it aims to promote the extraordinary contributions of people of African descent in the diaspora around the world. And Brad, we're coming from the cradle of humanity, the cradle of humankind. This includes everyone here, everyone that subscribes to free and equal dignity for everyone and rights to have the potential to contribute constructively to the development and to the well-being of their societies. So we hope that everyone feels included in this day. And that constructive contribution does not stop at boundaries, at some contiguous walls of a country. We know that people move abroad and they still want to serve and they still want to make a difference. And Democrats Abroad, which is this official party of the Democratic Party, an arm of the Democratic Party that represents over 9 million Americans living outside of the United States. And there are thousands and thousands of Americans that live on this continent. And the volunteer American leaders in Rwanda, in Botswana, in Ghana, in Mali, in Morocco, in Senegal, South Africa, and Kenya. We've band together so that we can encourage one another and that we can develop a strategy to keep Americans abroad informed of their rights and help them to participate in the US political process. And this being the thousands and thousands of Americans who reside here, who have business interests here in Africa, or who come and travel to Africa, we are reaching out and are letting them know the opportunities for them to continue to exercise their rights as US citizens. And it's through the political organizing that we are proud and we are very excited that there are now 2 Democratic Abroad Country Committees official, that is DASA, Democrats Abroad South Africa, which is under Brad's leadership as the chair, and Democrats Abroad Kenya, which I have just recently been elected. And then there are clusters of organizations in other countries, and we are weaving together to come as Democrats Abroad Africa. And we have 3 missions, and that is to increase voter registration of Americans that are living in Africa, to promote DA membership across Africa, and Ms. Banks, to roll in those votes. That is the ultimate goal. We believe that there are some values and some principles and some policies that we need to get under and give our voice to. And many of them is, and we can continue to be educated about those policies, that we can be informed and we can know where we need to put our vote. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Brad. And I want to now introduce our international chair. I have the distinct honor to do that. Please let me introduce our chairperson, Candice Kerestan. Candice is a Central Pennsylvania native, and she's lived in Germany for the past 8 years, and she currently serves as our international chair. And in this role, she works with and on-the-ground organizers from around the world that they seek out ways that we can find new voters, that we can activate those new voters, and we can give them direct access to exercising their rights. And Candice, just like the Democratic Party all over is changing and youth is coming in with new voices and new ideas. Candice is the youngest chair of the Democrats Abroad. Is that correct, Candice?
That is correct.
Oh, right. That's right. So you can.
And in all 50 states.
That's right. Yes, she is the youngest in all 50 states, and she's the second youngest in the Democratic Party in all of its history. So, you know, while we can see change and diversity and inclusion all over the place, youth and new voices, that is one that we're very proud of, and we're very proud of the energy that Candice is bringing. So Candice, if I can hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robyn, for those kind words. And likewise, we are excited by all the energy that you're bringing in Africa. And I just wanted to take a moment before we dive in and recognize again both Democrats Abroad South Africa and Democrats Abroad Kenya. As you mentioned, both of which were admitted in 2021 as our first official groups, or country committees as we call them, within Democrats Abroad International. And we really are excited to see such growth and engagement on the ground in Africa. And that really goes back to all the organizing that you and your teams and volunteers across the continent are doing on behalf of the Democratic Party. So thank you again. And that work, of course, includes organizing today's event. With that, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Dana Banks. Ms. Banks is a fellow native of Pennsylvania and a graduate of Spelman College and Syracuse University's Maxwell School. In her 22 years with the State Department, she has served as Deputy Political Counselor at the U.S. Embassy in South Africa, Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Togo, and as Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania. In Washington, Ms. Banks has worked in the Operations Center and as a Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Africa. Most recently, Ms. Banks served as the Director of Executive Development at the State Department's Foreign Service Institute. And now, as we know, she currently serves as Special Assistant to the President and as Senior Director for Africa at the National Security Council. Ms. Banks, we are so thrilled to have you join us today and to speak to us as Democrats Abroad and all of our members. Really looking forward to hearing you speak. And with that, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Candice and Robyn and Brad, for organizing this and for the lovely and warm welcome and introduction. So good afternoon/evening to folks around the continent and around the US. It truly is a pleasure for me to be here with you today, albeit virtually. And thank you to Democrats Abroad chapters across the globe for tuning in for what I hope will be a productive session and discussion. What I can say on Africa policy for this administration is that this past year has shown us how interconnected our world is and how our fates are bound up together. And that is why President Biden has committed to rebuilding our partnerships around the world, including on the continent, in a more respectful and mutually beneficial manner. And he realizes that we must all work together to advance our shared vision of a better future. Africa is at a pivotal moment in its trajectory, and the next decade will determine which path Africa takes. President Biden believes that Africa's many dynamic and fast-growing economies and populations can and should mean a bright future for the continent, a future that features inclusive growth, sustainable development, enhanced security, democratic progress, and certainly the rule of law. And the United States stands ready to partner with African nations, as well as its vibrant civil society and youth leaders across the continent in order to achieve this future. Our commitment in the Biden administration to achieving Africa's potential also means working with African nations to combat threats posed by violent extremism, threats posed by climate change, and undue foreign influence. And as we pursue our shared affirmative agenda, we will also work with African leaders to address conflicts and humanitarian crises that are costing lives around the continent. As President Biden said in the opening weeks of the administration, the United States stands ready to partner with Africa in solidarity, in support, and mutual respect. We believe in the nations of Africa, and we very much want to work together. African countries are looking for a new type of partnership with the United States that reflects this mutual respect that I mentioned. And we seek an Africa that is more connected and with greater capacity, that will be better positioned to cooperate with the United States to meet global challenges while advancing shared interests and values. So with those top lines of our Africa policy to date, I will now turn the floor over for questions, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Banks. I completely forgot to announce at the top of this line that you and I are brother and sister via our universities, Spelman and Morehouse. So yes, again, always good to chat with a Spelman sister. One of the first questions I'm going to lead off. One of the first questions I have is that what these extremists in my region, Southern Africa, the extremists pushing down into the northern Mozambique region, Cabo Delgado region of Mozambique. It seems like it's becoming a hotbed of extremist activities. We noted that several South Africans, I think one was killed and a couple were injured in a escape from the Islamists there. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Biden administration or what you all are seeing as the future of the region when it comes to extremism? South Africa is only one state away, so can you tell us what's the latest?
Sure, as soon as I unmute myself, thanks, Brad. Yes, we are continue to be concerned about by the spread of violent extremism, particularly as has been in the news, unfortunately. And as we know, for the Southern Africa region, which mainly has concentrated itself in northern Mozambique and the border with southern Tanzania, in addition to, unfortunately, in Somalia, where Al-Shabaab has definitely become more and more active, and where we do have an international mission led by the African Union. We are working with the regional leaders with SADC. SADC has deployed a military force to northern Mozambique, and led by the Rwandans. And we work with AFRICOM in providing training and assistance to Mozambican forces in order to combat that threat. Because as we know, our main objective is obviously to protect the homeland, which is the United States. but we also know that these threats promote instability in the regions, which makes it difficult for the people of those areas in northern Mozambique, in Somalia, to be able to prosper, to have stability, and to attract investment, which is something that we know can spur greater economic growth. So we will continue to work with our partners both in Mozambique and in northern Mozambique and in the region to address the threat that violent extremist organizations pose, the destabilizing threat to communities in Southern Africa, in Somalia, but also in the Sahel. And one last point I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is that, we really are looking at this issue of countering violent extremism from a root causes paradigm, whereas we have to look at what are the drivers of instability, what drives a young person in Somalia or in northern Mozambique or southern Tanzania to want to be able to join a group like Al-Shabaab. Is it lack of jobs? Surely. Lack of government sort of service delivery? Absolutely. Lack of proper education? Absolutely. So we really are looking at this from a holistic lens, and while working, on the very real sort of strategic focus on the technical assistance and capacity building for the military, we're also, and with our partners, we're also looking at it in terms of the assistance that USAID and other partners can provide to address the root causes of violent extremism.
Thank you, Robyn.
Yeah, I think as Brad has mentioned, and you did as well, Ms. Banks, speak about the violent extremism. And
sorry, Robyn, I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. If you wouldn't mind speaking just a little bit more loudly, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Is it still faint?
That's better. That's better. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, I was just saying that in East Africa, we also, you mentioned Al-Shabaab as well, but we also are seeing, they're actually even starting to let us know that there are some security heightened that is here, and as a result, a response to what's happening in Afghanistan. But my question here in this region is in regards to what's happening in East Africa and or Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Tigrayan region. And would love to hear from you, how is our administration, either humanitarian or security plans in that region? What are we doing in that region, and what do you see on the horizon there?
And thank you. Just to be clear, you're asking specifically about the conflict in Tigray and Ethiopia and the regional implications in the Horn of Africa. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Obviously, I must say Ethiopia was the top issue that I have been working on with colleagues across the interagency since joining the National Security Council, and we are deeply concerned that the conflict in northern Ethiopia is expanding and causing more suffering. Tigrayan forces or the TPLF have advanced beyond their home region into neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar. Eritrean forces have re-entered Tigray and resumed operations. The government of Ethiopia has called for mass mobilization of ethnic militias and its citizenry to join the fight. Meanwhile, inflammatory, dehumanizing rhetoric is increasing on social media. And despite the government's commitments, it continues to block humanitarian access. We estimate only about 7% of needed humanitarian aid has been able to get into the region over the past month, 7%. But what we're doing, the Biden-Harris administration is marshaling all the tools available to us to try to press the parties to allow humanitarian access, stop their advances, and to come to the negotiating table without preconditions. We are working closely with allies and partners. The president discussed earlier this summer, discussed this issue at the G7 Leaders Summit. Special Envoy Feltman, who was named by President Biden, is leading our diplomatic engagement with leaders across Africa, the Gulf, and Europe. And we are encouraging greater UN and AU leadership. Last week's UN Security Council session was an important step forward. The Secretary General also briefed the Council and made a strong statement calling for ceasefire negotiations. And just at the end of last week, the African Union also appointed former Nigerian President Obasanjo as a special envoy to the Horn to help address the situation. We consider this a positive development because we very much want to see, African solutions led by African leaders in the region. We will also seek to increase pressure if the parties continue to prosecute the war. And just last week as well, we announced our first global Magnitsky sanctions against the Eritrean Defense Chief of Staff. We are preparing expanded financial sanctions if the parties do not commit to a negotiated ceasefire and end ongoing abuses. And what we have been doing here domestically with the Ethiopian diaspora as well is, we've been holding roundtables and reaching out to the Ethiopian diaspora, which is numerous, as you can imagine here in the U.S. But we are seeking to partner more with them as they work to resolve differences in their home country, and obviously to partner with Ethiopians on the continent in Ethiopia and in the region to help them resolve differences and forge a peaceful way forward. Contrary to, I think, a narrative that has been propagated, we are supportive of the Ethiopian people. And to that extent, we have provided over $4.2 billion in assistance to Ethiopia over the past 5 years, which touches every region of the country. So yes, our historical ties between Ethiopia and the United States are deep and rich. I mentioned the diaspora, and we will continue to engage with Ethiopian American leaders to solicit their help as well, and ideas for how we can best contribute to resolving this evolving crisis.
Great, thank you, Ms. Banks. Brad, can I ask another one as we are?
Sure, I see a few questions coming in. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me keep it warm going. Ms. Banks, so I know some administrations have had legacy policies. I think we remembered like George Bush was ABC. We had an ABC policy. We had like YALI, we had a YALI come out of maybe Obama. Do you see a legacy are you starting to think about what might be a legacy in this administration for Africa policy?
Sure. Yes. So I think, I'm not sure what the ABC policy was, but I am familiar with it.
I think it was around his abstinence, something. I try not to remember everything.
Oh, in the health sector. Okay. Yes. Well, we definitely still have the PEPFAR initiative that was started under President Bush, which, to this day continues to save lives across the continent. And I think, these types of presidential initiatives that are sustainable and that have a proven track record and that we can really continue to use regardless of whoever is in the office to address the critical needs that we still have on the continent. So yes, we've had PEPFAR, we have had MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, we've had the YALI Young African Leaders Initiative, which has turned into the Mandela Washington Fellows, and Power Africa, Prosper Africa, which was started under the previous administration, but which we have just relaunched in July of this year, because again, we don't want to sort of necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, but this was an initiative that when I was on the ground in Pretoria that had started and that we had looked at and said, look, there's some good foundational pieces here, but with an increased focus on infrastructure on the diaspora, on attracting more investment from women, and focusing on investing in women entrepreneurs on the continent. This is, and combining with the Development Finance Corporation and the other 17 agencies that comprise Prosper Africa. This is really an initiative that can really robustly increase our trade and investment on the continent and provide, two-way gains, not just for the people and businesses on the continent, but also for American workers and investors back at home. So, so far we're still, even though it's 8 months in now, it feels like a lot longer, but there is still a lot of good initiatives in the pipeline that we are working on. Not all are Africa specific. Africa is integrated fully into all of the major policy initiatives of the administration, as it's focused on climate, as well as COVID-19. So I think that what we can say is that stay tuned. You will see how Africa continues to be integral to many of the initiatives of the key priorities of this administration, but definitely Prosper Africa is we can say the first shot over the bow. A relaunched Prosper Africa is an initiative I think that will continue to pay dividends for the continent. And one last point, we are working on in my office a digital Africa initiative, because as we know, access to internet and digital infrastructure is very much key for economic growth. And so we are putting a lot of heads together and around the interagency and coming up with a digital Africa initiative that we hope to launch shortly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Ms. Banks, I have to, we're in Africa. We're having a critical issue here with COVID. Clearly, the Biden administration has done more than most Western nations in donating vaccines, especially even here in South Africa. I think we just got a shipment of Pfizer on Monday, the president told us. We're one of the critical issues within Democrats abroad globally is this issue of Americans not having easy access to COVID, to the vax, to the jabs. Is there anything coming down the pipeline? And it's maybe bigger than just Africa, but for Americans abroad who are citizens of the country, not being able to access vaccine is an issue. Is there a general statement on that? Speaking either in Africa or just broadly, could you tell us a little bit about what the administration's plans are, or if they're going to change that?
Thanks, Brad. So now this is getting just a wee bit outside of my lane. I am not an epidemiologist, and nor do I pretend to be. And there are colleagues in this building with far more knowledge and experience on this particular issue than I. And I have been a part of certain discussions and conversations, sort of obviously regarding our global COVID-19 response. I cannot speak specifically to what may be coming in terms of Americans overseas and access to vaccines, but I know that as I mentioned, my colleagues, my counterparts in the health security and biothreat directorate, for example, or in the development directorate, are thinking about some of these questions. So, but I don't have anything to sort of give to you right now, one way or another on that. But it is part of the conversation, I will say, without committing to anything. But where I can talk about in terms of our COVID-19 response on the continent, the United States, I mentioned PEPFAR earlier, we have a strong health partnership with Africa back to the days of when PEPFAR was incepted and created under President Bush, because there was a national security need in order to save lives on the continent of people who are suffering from HIV and AIDS. The goal for us with our response, particularly on the continent to COVID-19, is that we want to ensure that we're helping African countries defeat the pandemic, and that they are positioned to prevent and to respond to future outbreaks. So, in addition to PEPFAR, we also had the President's Malaria Initiative and then the Global Health Security Agenda. All of these initiatives have done many things, but one thing that they've done is that they've helped to improve the capacity of healthcare systems across the continent. So much so that when there was an Ebola outbreak, and I don't know if folks from West Africa are on the line, but earlier this year in the midst of the pandemic, there was another Ebola outbreak. And we were able to work with our existing sort of, networks on the ground in DRC, in Guinea, in Liberia, to just basically reactivate those systems and that were already in place because of our work, consistent work on health system strengthening throughout the years. And we're able to, in working with them, and they were in providing what they needed, they were able to tamp out that outbreak quite quickly. So I think that is one concrete example of how our investment, as American taxpayer investment, right, over the past 20 years plus in strengthening health systems, we hope will continue to pay dividends, particularly as we look at addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and trying to prevent future outbreaks. And so what we've done, in addition to providing allocation of our own stocks of COVID-19 vaccines, is that we are also working with the Africa CDC, with our colleagues at the African Union, in trying to work, again, African-led solutions to problems. They have already worked out through their own mechanisms how many allocations countries, member states of the AU should be given, but also what is needed to help provide, to build infrastructure to prevent future outbreaks, and what types of materials and supplies and equipments that are needed, and the research and development that can go into manufacturing vaccines on the continent for Africans. So we're involved in all of those sectors, and it is a partnership, it is a collaboration. We have our COVID-19 lead at the State Department in Gail Smith, who has a vast experience and background on the continent and also with development work. So I'm confident, even though it's a difficult time now in terms of responding to COVID-19, I know that our investments in the future will pay great dividends on the continent.
Thank you. Thank you. Robyn, Candice, do you have a question? Can't leave you out.
Sure, I'd love to jump in. And I see a question that just came into the chat, which ties in nicely both to what Democrats Abroad is doing at the moment. And we'd love to hear your take on it, Ms. Banks, as well. And the question concerns Medicare and access to Medicare. I wanted to just share that Democrats Abroad recently launched a Medicare portability task force. We also have a COVID-19 task force. And we know that there's so much moving about these days, especially with our retired communities and having access to Medicare benefits overseas. So that is something that we're taking on here at Democrats Abroad. And I wanted to ask, it looks like the question directed to you, Ms. Banks, is, are there any insights that you can share here in terms of the Medicare system? And again, I know health isn't necessarily your number one lane, but maybe there's something you can share just about Medicare for our older community living overseas, particularly in Africa.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so this goes beyond healthcare. This goes to domestic policy. When we talk about Medicare and provision of benefits for Americans overseas, so that's definitely something that here at the National Security Council, we usually deal with mostly national security issues and foreign affairs. We have a whole domestic policy. The president has a domestic policy council who deals with these issues. But what I can say, being a foreign service officer and having done consular work overseas, this is my one bit of advice, is to reach out to the American Citizen Services section of the your consular sections at your embassies and posts overseas, and perhaps they can provide a little better guidance than I could. But it is good to hear that you have a council on COVID-19 as well as Medicare, because I know that's a crucial issue.
Thank you so much.
Other questions? I think we're going to 45 after the hour, so we have about 7 more minutes.
Yes. Well, I definitely have to get for my economic development people who are online here. I have to ask some questions about what I think. Let's start off with the global ramifications of Russia and China investing here on the continent of Africa, and what are some of the initiatives that Prosper Africa is utilizing or to counteract that economic development coming from Russia and China. And then for the small business folk, I see this question here now. The U.S. Small Business Administration has a program for, is it Americans doing business in Africa? Is that correct? And if so, could you just expound on that in terms of economic development?
Okay, sure. As soon as I unmute myself, happy to take the question. The SBA, yes. So the Small Business Administration, I think, piece will fit into sort of my response on China overall, but also on Prosper Africa. So the Small Business Administration is one of the 17 departments and agencies that comprise Prosper Africa. And I encourage you all to go to their website and there's a specific link for each agency, so you can look at and see how the role that each agency plays in promoting trade and advancement, and how they can help you where you are on the continent in terms of matchmaking and looking at deals. The Department of Commerce's International Trade Division also has a role in that matchmaking function. So I encourage you to look at that. But yeah, so overall, in terms of China and Russia as well, but really Russia is not in the development space as much, and I use development quotes, as China is on the continent. But this administration sees African countries as partners in pursuing shared interests, which is a very different model than what China does, obviously. We're looking from the security standpoint, global health, climate change, democracy, and economic growth. And it is within that framework that we see our engagement, the US engagement in Africa, not necessarily as competition with China, but rather support for strategic partners on the continent. Still, yes, the reality is that China is our most serious competitor, and competition with China is one of the central challenges that will define the 21st century. In Africa, we will continue to meet the challenge that China presents by ensuring that American companies can compete on an even playing field, providing a meaningful alternative to China's economic approach, while we promote entrepreneurship, capacity building, and fair practices within the framework of rule of law. We will continue to push back on corrupt and coercive practices that damage our interests and, quite frankly, the interests of our African partners. And we truly believe that our alternative vision for economic development that promotes democratic governance, human rights, and transparency is something that our African partners are looking for. In terms of programs, in addition to Prosper Africa, President Biden, and I think I mentioned this earlier as well, recently launched a new initiative, which is the Build Back Better World, or B3W as we call it, which is an affirmative initiative for meeting the tremendous infrastructure needs of low and middle income countries. President Biden and G7 partners agreed to launch this bold new global infrastructure agenda, which is values driven by instilling high standards and a transparent infrastructure partnership led by major democracies in order to help narrow the $40+ trillion infrastructure need in the developing world. And with B3W, the United States will work to continue to unlock billions in US private capital flows into Africa, providing governments with high quality private financing through DFC, for example. We will also partner with US and African financial services sectors to strategically deploy blended financing resources to develop cost-effective trade financing tools. So I think I answered both of those parts of that question.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left. I've got one last question from one of my members here in South Africa. Secretary Blinken came through on a virtual tour of Africa in August. I think he did Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal. And I don't know if there were more stops, but the question is, was anything accomplished on that trip and to highlight with us here now that you can share with us that came out of those virtual sessions?
Sure, let me just correct the record because I participated in those virtual visits and they were not in August, it was in April, and the countries were Nigeria and Kenya. And that was still when we were at the very height where people even here in the States were still getting vaccinated. And so we came up, or the State Department came up with a way to be able to still engage at the highest levels virtually in this COVID environment. And so, yes, a lot has been, I think, accomplished from the power of when you have the Secretary of State engaging with leaders of two key allies on the continent. A lot is accomplished. It says that it demonstrates that not only are we going to do a phone call, but we're going to take the time and actually set up within, this COVID constraints to set up a virtual visit to talk about issues of mutual interest. And I can say I was also in the room when the Kenyan foreign minister was able to travel to the US and met with Secretary Blinken in person. And we hope to have a string of other senior cabinet level officials visiting the continent in the coming weeks and months, and not just cabinet officials, but other senior administration officials. So, we had to be creative, right? Like, COVID presented challenges to be sure, but also opportunities. So in advance of actually preceding the virtual visits, President Biden and like half of the other senior cabinet officials, including Secretary Kerry, convened a climate summit virtually as well. So we found it to be an effective and a useful tool. You'll see perhaps more of them now that the Delta variant has sort of taken hold here as well. They'll obviously be for the upcoming UN General Assembly. The UN is working through their protocols on how they're going to hold meetings and whether it'll be in person or a hybrid or mixed, and then we'll have to adjust. But the importance is, and the key to emphasize and to highlight is that we are there and that we are engaging. And just one other counterpoint to that, the Chinese are holding their Development Cooperation Summit later this year. So just stay tuned to how their leaders engage, whether it's on the continent or virtual as well. So I'll just leave you with that.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have today. Robyn, is there anything else?
Well, I think before we ask Ms. Banks to give her a closing statement, what would you say to Americans abroad and how they can engage with the administration or on some of the policy issues, you know, with people here that have varied backgrounds that they'd love to be involved in and you know, lend their expertise or their knowledge inside of policy development, or maybe some urging on if you need some push outside of the country, you need some push on some policies. What would you say, what would you advise Americans abroad out here to do to work with the administration? Anything?
I would say, you know, I think forums like this are very useful. We need, we talk to and we need to have various voices in the conversations that we're having on policy. And I've addressed various think tanks and other institutions on Africa policy around Washington who also have a good reach into sort of the policy community, particularly the Africa policy community, domestically, but also abroad. So I would say looking for opportunities like this to play a role. I would say definitely look at the White House website often and look at the types of releases and statements that have come out, in addition to looking at State Department, depending, you know, looking at a USAID, and to look at the program areas and the things that our administration officials are highlighting, and to see where you really can maybe perhaps be a value added, and if you have something additive to bring to the policy discussion, to seek out those opportunities or those officials or those organizations who can help effectively funnel your thoughts or your analyses on a particular issue to the right channels. That would be my advice.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. This concludes today's event. I'd like to thank Ms. Dana Banks, Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director for Africa, National Security Council, for speaking to us today. And I'd also like to thank our various members and membership across Africa and across the Global DA for participating. And if you are not a member of Democrats Abroad, we'd like for you to become one. It is democratsabroad.org. I put it in the chat. I don't know if I put it in the right chat, but it's there. And please participate. We plan on having more events like this, sharing and talking to leaders in the community. And with that, I hope everybody has a good and pleasant evening or day, wherever you are.
Thank you so much, Ms. Banks. And again, thank you, Bradley and Robyn, for organizing today.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be here. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for taking time to be with us. Okay.
Absolutely.
Good night, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.